Hello, everybody. Jonathan Pulley here with the West Coast weather. Today is January 14th, and we're going to talk about the Arctic air that socked in over much of the Pacific Northwest and the Intermountain West, bring very cold and dangerous temperatures that also bring an ice storm to parts of central Willamette Valley, a snowstorm and ice pellet storm to parts of Portland, and also some very damaging strong winds to parts of the eastern Portland metro area and also the Columbia Gorge. This also, the Arctic front also brings some snow to parts of western Washington as well, including South Whidbey Island, parts of Port Townsend, Port Angeles, and Lake Stevens in the Everett area, where a convergence zone set up. Our next system is off the coast right now, way off in the southern Gulf of Alaska, just northeast of the Hawaiian Islands. This is going to bring in some subtropical moisture into the region, also colliding with some chilly air still over the region, which may bring a potential for an ice/snowstorm to parts of the southwest BC and parts of western Washington as well. Models are still not very clear on exactly what's going to happen. We'll take a look at that. But then it looks like most of the cold air goes away as we go through later this week and opens up the potential for an atmospheric river as we go through later this week. So we'll take a look at that as well. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Before we dive into some of the weather models, let's take a look at some of the observed low temperatures in the last night. And some of these temperatures were colder the night before last, but here we go. You can see some very, very cold temperatures around the regions. A very strong Arctic blast hit the region with the low temperature last night getting down to 14 at SeaTac just south of Seattle. 14 degrees also for NAS Whidbey on Whidbey Island, and also 12 degrees up in near Bellingham, which actually got down to about 3 degrees the other day, which was a record temperature for that date. You can see also temperatures in the teens for southwest Washington, parts of most of Portland as well. You can see it's also temperatures in the negatives with -4 degrees in Spokane. In some of the mountains just north of there, double-digit negative temperatures. So very cold air with even some -30s in parts of Montana as well. And then you can see some negatives in single digits as well in eastern Oregon. So some very cold air over much of the region that made it all the way out over the coastline. Now taking a look at the general ridge and trough positions on the European model, this is fresh off the press. You can see our cold Arctic air starting to slide east and south over parts of the rest of the United States. Going to bring some snow and some winter storm conditions to parts of the central and eastern United States. But then you can see we got a bit of a ridge over the next day or so, going all the way into early on Tuesday, kind of drying out the area, but still keeping it cool, pretty cool and chilly around the region. But then you can see our next storm system kind of splits off this Kona low just north of the Hawaiian Islands, and this flings some subtropical moisture into the Pacific Northwest. It also collides with this polar lobe that kind of swings out of British Columbia over parts of the Pacific Northwest. This is going to bring potential for some freezing rain to rain, or also potential for some snow to freezing rain to just rain as we go through later on Tuesday into Wednesday, including in the parts of Thursday as well. Before it looks like we get this strong troughing over the Gulf of Alaska, which is going to bring some potential for some atmospheric rivers moving in the much of the West Coast, including California as well. And you can see this kind of continues on as we go through later next week, but we'll continue to watch that as we go. And looking at the GFS, it has a similar thing showing up. And as we play this through, you can see the low pressure system move into the Pacific Northwest, but you can notice that the system isn't as strong on the GFS, and also that polar lobe moving out of the British Columbia and Alberta area is also not nearly as strong. So some pretty good model disagreement in just a 3 to 4 day time range, but we're kind of used to that now, especially after the last few days and last week of weather watching. Now looking at the precipitable water in inches on the European model, you can see our next storm system approaching the coastline as we go through later on Tuesday, bringing some of that subtropical moisture all the way down from Hawaii, bringing a potential atmospheric river in the parts of California. Now looking at the 6-hour precipitation type in inches and also the pressure, you can see this kind of gives us a good idea of what type of precipitation we're going to see during a time period. But then you can see this pink, the freezing rain that shows up, and then the blues, snow, and the green. You can see that the European model kind of keeps the temperatures cold enough at the surface, but it warms the temperatures up in the upper in the atmosphere above freezing, which causes freezing rain to occur. I'll show a good graphic here in a second. But you can see it brings mostly just freezing rain and then switching over the pure rain for much of the Seattle area, bringing some snowfall to parts of southwest Oregon, which it looks like there's could be a decent chance for a good snowstorm for parts of Vancouver, eastern Vancouver Island, north of Vancouver as well, especially the Nanaimo area, as that moisture wraps around and goes into those mountains. But the models tend to scour out the cold air a little faster than it actually does happen. So there's potential that the cold air hangs around a little longer and could cause a bigger freezing rain / snow event for parts of southwest BC, western Washington, and parts of the Willamette Valley as well. And looking at the accumulated freezing rain in inches on the European model, as we play this out, you can see that it brings about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch of rain for a lot of western Washington and Oregon, except maybe the coastlines. But this would be really damaging because freezing rain accumulates on all surfaces, creating basically an ice skating rink wherever it happens, and also causing tree limbs and power lines to bend, which can cause some widespread power outages if the ice accumulation is big enough. So definitely not the type of weather you really want, especially around here with all of our evergreen trees. Now look at the accumulating freezing rain on the GFS. You can see also maybe a couple tenths of an inch of freezing rain for Seattle, and also even potentially more for Portland. So definitely some decent model agreement, at least some freezing rain for people, which is not good. Looking at the Canadian model, it also has even more, with approaching over 1/2 an inch of rain for Portland and just southwest of Seattle as well. So not a good look for freezing rain over the next couple of days. But now looking at the temperatures as this precipitation starts later on Tuesday and early on Wednesday, you can see that surface temperatures are just about freezing. But then if we look at the temperatures are around 2,500 feet in the atmosphere, you can see this is in Celsius. So you can see that 3 degrees is above freezing on the Celsius scale. And anywhere that it is above freezing, about a couple thousand feet in the atmosphere, but below freezing near the surface, there's potential for ice pellets and especially freezing rain. Wherever it's below freezing at this point, which the line is up near, would be up towards the San Juans into Vancouver, that would be staying as mostly snow, at least for the start of it. Now looking at a good graphic from the Met Office, you can see that freezing rain has a big wedge of warm air in the atmosphere above us, but it's below it. All the snow from the upper atmosphere melts into rain, but then there's a freezing layer right near the surface. So this causes the rain to get super cooled. So basically when it's super cooled, the temperature of the water droplets are actually below freezing, but the velocity of the rain causes it to not actually turn into snow. So basically as it hits the ground, it immediately freezes and causes freezing rain. And it can cause a lot of winter weather hazards, including very tough and almost impossible driving conditions and also power outages. Now looking at total snow Kucher ratio in inches on the European model, you can see as we go through later this week and into the weekend, you can see the European model keeps most of that snow north of the Everett area and Seattle area, and keeping maybe a decent snowstorm with maybe 2 to 6 inches of snow for parts of Vancouver and eastern Vancouver Island, higher in the mountains. What is for sure is that the mountains are going to get a good bit amount of more snow, which is always welcome this time of the year, especially how dry the mountains have been over the past month. But you can see that there is potential for almost no snow for Seattle, but if the low pressure system goes far enough south and some of that cold air stays longer in that warmer air up above the surface stays below freezing, then it may cause snow all the way down to Seattle as well. So a very complicated forecast. And looking at the same total snow and Kucher ratio on the GFS, you can see it brings the snow slightly farther south, but also has it north of Everett and Seattle, bringing a decent snowstorm in the parts of southwest BC and central and eastern BC, as well as you go into some of the prairie locations. Now taking a closer look at the European ensemble mean, so this is an average of all the 50 different ensemble areas. It gives us a better idea. You can see that it actually does give a bit of snow to Seattle and northward, but mainly keeps the snow also north of like this. Basically the San Juan Islands and Bellingham northward are going to have the best chances for snow. But anywhere south of that has potential for some accumulating freezing rain. So definitely not the best setup if you want some snow down here in Western Washington. And Portland, Oregon looks to be completely freezing rain. The rain almost no potential for snow for Portland this round, but they did get that winter storm yesterday. Now looking at precipitable water anomaly on the European model, this is basically showing us how much moisture there is in the atmosphere compared to normal. So blues is drier than normal, reds and oranges and browns are above normal. You can see our storm system kind of move into Western Washington / Oregon. Just how far south this goes depends. It will decide who gets snow, who gets more snow or more freezing rain or just pure rain. But then you can see as we go through Thursday and the Friday, there's a potential for an atmospheric river to move in as these specific storm systems start turning off the coast. This is going to be potential all the way from Southwest BC all the way to California with some heavy precipitation totals possible. If we look at the European ensemble mean, we can see that these as these potential atmospheric rivers and storm systems move through, it shows several inches of rain for Portland and almost the entire West Coast, with potential for over 3 inches of rain up and down much of the West Coast, with the coastal ranges and the mountains picking up even potentially 5 to 7 inches or more over the coming weeks. So definitely a very rainy pattern looking at likely as we go through later this week into next week. Now looking at the accumulating rain on the higher resolution Canadian model, this is up close. So here's Washington, Oregon right here, and Southwest BC is right here, Vancouver Island, Northern California right there. As we play this through, it shows quite a bit of freezing rain with 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch for much of the Puget Sound, which would be very damaging, with almost approaching near 1 inch of rain for Portland. This is likely overdoing it a bit, but there is potential for over 1/4 inch of freezing rain in places, which will likely cause some pretty damaging power outages. Now looking at a graph from the National Weather Service of Spokane showing the dangerous wind chills out east. This will continue over the next day or so, with the weather risk being major. And you can see impact hypothermia and frostbite is likely with prolonged exposure and lack of proper clothing, damage the pipes. Please just stay inside if possible. If you have to go outside, dress in loose layers and cover all exposed skin, consume hot foods and drinks, check on family, friends, and neighbors. And then you can see that there was also some pretty heavy rainfall that hit parts of Southwest Oregon the last day or so. So there's some flooding down there. So just be careful if you're down near Port Orchard and some of those coastal mountain ranges living around there. Now looking at all the European ensemble members on the European model, you can see that this is for Whidbey Island Naval Air Station. And you can see that as we go through later on Tuesday into Wednesday, you can see that it does have potential for snow the Whidbey Island as well, with the mean up towards 2 inches. This is likely overdoing it a bit with the control up down towards 1 inch, and the temperature is going to be very marginal, so the actual accumulating snow is going to be even less than that. So there's potential for a dusting up to maybe 1 inch or 2 of snow for parts of Whidbey if they get lucky or unlucky depending on how you see snow. But you can see some ensemble members do have a decent snowstorm for Whidbey Island, but you can see that the vast majority of them are showing little to no snow. And looking at the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, even less of a chance, but even potential higher snow totals, as there could be potential for some deformation bands with this low pressure system. But you can see the control run almost had basically had 0 snow for Seattle, so definitely not looking likely for a snowstorm of sorts for the Seattle metro area. Looking at the precipitation, though, in general, for the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport SeaTac, you can see the likely big rain events as we go through later this week into next week, with the mean up over 4 inches for 15 days out. Portland, a similar thing. You can see that most of this precipitation starting out on Wednesday will probably be potential for some freezing rain before switching to all rain as we go through later next week, with also the heavy rain potential. Look at going all the way down the Sacramento International Airport for California, you can see that they're also going to likely get on this action with almost every ensemble member over 2 inches of rain at least, with the mean approaching 4 inches as we go through the 10 to 15 day time frame. And also the same thing for the San Francisco International Airport, also showing over 2 inches of rain possibly as we go through later this weekend and into next week. Now taking a look at the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. This is for January 19th through the 23rd. So they're showing that warm up as well as some of those warm Pacific systems move into the region. And also, obviously, this is going to be highlighted with above average precipitation potentially for almost the entire West Coast through this time frame. Looking at the 8 to 14 day temperature outlook, very similar with those Pacific systems potentially still staying through this area. Some models also show some ridging potentially building over the West Coast, which would keep above normal temperatures as well. But also they're highlighting the potential for more Pacific systems through the January 21st through the 27th timeframe. So definitely plenty of active weather to still look at as we go through mid to late January. Well, that's it for this video. I hope everybody found this enjoyable and informative. Just please hit the like button, subscribe buttons down below. It helps grow the channel out and it's much appreciated. So there's the cold air is going to remain over the region over the next couple of days before moderating, and potential for some ice and snow over parts of western Washington and southwest BC. Mainly rain or freezing rain for parts of western Oregon, unfortunately. So there is going to be potential for some power outages if this freezing rain event does occur over parts of the area. But it's a very challenging forecast because the low pressure system, wherever it goes, even if it's just a couple more miles south or north, it really will change who sees what. So I will likely do a possible video tomorrow, but if I don't, I'll catch you later next week talking about the potential for some heavy rain in atmospheric rivers as we go through the coming weeks. So take care, God bless, and I'll talk to everybody in the next video.